Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books My Dad, who has a PhD in English Literature, thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature. Also known as Gwen aimlessly chatters about real literature. So, right, real literature. This week's book is a book that actually makes it onto a lot of people's lists. There are a lot of books on my list that my father gave me that don't make it onto people's lists. Because you can find all over the internet or in books or collections or whatever, you can find a lot of people's lists of the top 20 books everybody should read, the top 100 books, the top whatever greatest novels of the English language. You name it, you can find a list of things that you ought to read. And on those lists, there tend to be a fair number of books that people agree on. Jane Austen is one, which is why Jane Austen is on this list. This week's book is another one of those books that makes it onto a lot of those lists. Again, the thing about these lists, of course, is that they do tend to be idiosyncratic because there are so many books written and so many books that meet the standard of great literature, given that we have had novels ever since the 18th century. That's a lot of books, and, by sheer volume, you're going to have a lot of them that are considered to be great literature. In this case, the book in question is one people will have actually heard of for certain. Not that I didn't think people hadn't heard of some of these books, but the thing is that historical fiction is in its way genre fiction, so The King Hereafter, while I would not dispute that it is a truly, truly excellent novel, might not make a lot of people's lists because it is genre fiction. The spy novel might not make it, again, genre fiction. The hard-boiled mystery that came up earlier, genre fiction. I have a science fiction book that comes up at some point in the future. It's an Ursula Le Guin book. I don't have my list in front of me, so I can't tell you which one. The point is, there's a lot of stuff on this list, a couple of books that no one will have ever heard of. And, books that no one has ever heard of can't make lists for most people because no one will have heard of them. In the case of The Great Gatsby, most people in the English-speaking world have heard of this one. This is considered one of the great American novels. It is considered one of the great novels, period. So, the thing about this novel is it falls into one of those categories of novels that are not... This isn't one of the ones where it's a writer's novel. Some of the books on this list have complex writing techniques, are written in ways and vocabularies that are designed to speak to the intellectual, that are designed to say precisely what you mean with precise diction and precise word choice, because one of the wonders of language is the more words you have in a language, the easier it is to be incredibly precise in what you want to say, because somewhere there is a word for that. The Great Gatsby isn't one of those. The Great Gatsby is a book that is much simpler in its language. That is not to say that it's poorly written. It's simply that the word choices are not highfalutin. They are not $5 words. It is not a book of sesquipedalian vocabulary. And the narrator, he comes across as not an unintelligent person, but not a person who you look at and say this person is a great genius or one of the great erudite minds of the world. Instead, he's a fairly ordinary, if from a fairly wealthy background, young man who winds up, over the course of this summer described in The Great Gatsby, just having this series of unexpected experiences that require him to sort of think beyond his normal perceptions of things. And in a lot of ways, this book is just about looking at parts of this are about looking at societal norms, because everybody here is simultaneously following a lot of societal norms while at the same time violating them. Like the husband, Tom, who has a mistress which is totally normal and yet acts in violation of societal norm. And his mistress is also of a different class than he is, which is normal for a mistress, but at the same time, if you're going to romance somebody, you should stick to your own class, because there are things that people from another class don't always understand, if you're going to take that particular elitist look at things. Of course, the core of this book is is Daisy and Jay Gatsby and the romance that they had. And when Gatsby left for war, Daisy wound up marrying Tom, and then she and Gatsby have kind of a thing. That is, when they finally meet up again, there are still feelings between them. The interesting thing in this is that the one person that you definitively feel sympathy for in a lot of ways is our narrator, because he's on the outside looking in and has no emotional stake in this beyond what he sort of allows himself to have. And he's the only one who, as far as we can tell, I mean, you can always play the unreliable narrator game, he's the only one who doesn't ever act in a way that's reprehensible. Tom is cheating on his wife and is horrible to a lot of people and is clearly racist and probably eminently sexist. And Daisy winds up running down Tom's mistress, and it's implicit to an extent in the book that it's implicit that she deliberately ran down Tom's mistress, but it's also possible that it was just an accident. It's never quite sure, because we only hear this through Jay Gatsby. And Jay Gatsby is so in love with her that he will say just about anything and forgive her anything, because he's placed her on a pedestal and he never takes her off of it. And the thing is, of course, that our narrator, he goes through this whole book and he kind of wobbles in between sympathy for Gatsby and not, because, of course, when he's first properly introduced to Gatsby, when Gatsby starts spending time with him, he's aware that Gatsby is pretending to be of a class that he's not, that his speech patterns are clearly entirely artificial and put on by somebody who doesn't actually know how the upper classes speak, and is basing this off of one too many romance novels that he's read, or something like that. Or possibly just spending way too much time with a wealthy man who was so significantly older that all of his speech patterns are entirely anachronistic. But either way, Gatsby's putting on a front, but at the same time, you, of course, feel sympathy for him because you're supposed to feel sympathy for him because he's put Daisy on this pedestal and doesn't seem capable of looking at the world without these sorts of pedestals and artificialities attached to it. And, it's an excellent book, but boy, is it depressing. I mean, it's depressing because you have this narrator who goes through this summer, and at the end of it comes out of it just having had so much of his optimism in the world and his belief in the possibilities of the human condition and his belief in goodness of people has been clearly crushed. And he's discovered exactly how horrible his cousin can be. Because when he starts, when at the start of the book, when he runs into her, it's his perspective on it is foreshadowed when he says that she had a gift for talking to you in a way that made you feel like she was speaking just to you and confessing things to you. It foreshadows the way that she lets Jay Gatsby take the blame for her running down the mistress, and the way that she never steps forward, the way that she doesn't show up for his funeral, the way that she and Tom seem to just curl in on themselves and refuse to acknowledge that there is a culpability in their actions, as well as Wilson, who wound up shooting Jay Gatsby because it was Gatsby's car that ran over Wilson's wife, Tom's mistress, and ostensibly Gatsby was driving it. And so he went and he shot Gatsby, and at the end of this, you have this just sort of sense of emptiness and pointlessness. And it's one of those, it's an ending that I suppose is supposed to be about how we keep trying even though there's no point, because the point is the trying, not that there's a point, which is one of those circular things that, frankly, I've never particularly liked that recursive concept of the point is to keep trying because otherwise there is no point, because there isn't a point to trying except the trying, which is entirely recursive and meaningless. But it ends with that quote that I'm sure we've all heard somewhere or other before, that Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgiastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Which is the end of this novel. That is, that we futilely keep trying and trying, hoping for that thing that we hoped for yesterday, but that we can't ever reach because, of course, there are things that we can never get to. But it's the problematic aspect of this novel that, to an extent, it's about hope and effort and trying and reaching for bigger and better things, but at the same time, it's about the sheer undiluted hopelessness of never getting those things. And that's why I will never like this book, because it is about the bald awfulness of human nature, which, frankly, isn't something that I enjoy very much, because only the narrator seems to be somebody who isn't just awful. Well, no, Jay Gatsby's father doesn't seem bad, but since he's there for basically one scene and is grieving for his son, we don't actually know. But, everybody is a cheat or a liar in some way. Jay Gatsby, who we do feel sympathy for, is also kind of a cheat and a liar, because he's been trying to pretend to be something he's not in order to become good enough for Daisy, who basically got him killed. Now, there is a certain amount of stance that people say that we should be sympathetic, and just because she wasn't strong enough to stand up to this, that, or the other thing, doesn't mean we should treat her as a vile human being, and I suppose that's possible. You can spin that interpretation. But frankly, I think everybody but the narrator in this novel is horrible, and because he's the narrator and it's written from his perspective, we will never actually know whether or not he was horrible. Well, no, actually, Wilson probably wasn't bad, except that Wilson is clearly not a very dynamic person and is boring, so he's not all that great either. And he murdered a man, so not good. Anyways, that's everything I have to say, so I'll see you all next week.